Some places don't fall apart, they wait, the old man at the gas station had said, right before laughing at Ethan Cole for buying the worst cabin in the county for $200 cash. And now, as snow drifted in slow spirals through the pine trees, Ethan stood in front of that same broken structure, its roof sagging like it had given up years ago, its windows dark and hollow, but beside him, Rex didn't move. The German shepherd stood frozen, ears high, eyes fixed not on the door, not on the trees, but on the ground beneath the cabin, like he was listening to something buried deep below, something patient, something alive, and Ethan felt it too, not as a sound, but as a weight in the air, the kind of silence that pressed against your chest and made your breath slow down without asking. He stepped forward, boots crunching over frozen dirt, each step echoing softly through the stillness. The wind whispered through the cracked wood, carrying the scent of old timber and something colder, something metallic, and when he pushed the door open, it didn't creak the way abandoned places should. It exhaled, like it had been holding its breath for years. Inside, dust floated in pale beams of winter light, the floorboards worn but steady, the walls lined with shadows that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. Rex entered slowly, nails tapping once, twice, then stopping completely, his body stiff, his gaze locked downward, and then he did something Ethan had never seen before. He refused to move, not forward, not back, just stood there, staring at one exact spot on the floor, as if the entire world had narrowed to that single place. Ethan followed his eyes. Nothing at first, just wood, old and faded, but then he noticed it, a faint marking, almost invisible unless the light hit it just right, a symbol, sharp and deliberate, not carved by time, but by a hand that knew exactly what it was doing, and something inside Ethan tightened, not fear, not exactly, but recognition, the kind that comes without explanation, like a memory you don't remember living. The air shifted, just slightly, and then it came, so subtle he almost missed it, a vibration under his boots, faint, steady, like a heartbeat far below the surface. He froze, counting without thinking. 1, 2, 3, until it came again, the same rhythm, precise, measured, and Rex let out a low sound, not a growl, not a warning, something older, something that felt like understanding, and Ethan slowly knelt, pressing his hand against the cold wood, feeling it pulse beneath his palm, and in that moment, he knew, this cabin wasn't broken, it was waiting. The vibration did not stop when Ethan lifted his hand. It continued beneath the floor in steady intervals, calm and deliberate, like something that had no need to rush, and for a long moment he stayed there on one knee, listening, counting again without meaning to, 27 seconds, then again, exact, unchanging, and Rex lowered himself slowly beside that same spot, his nose hovering just above the wood, not touching, as if even he understood there was a boundary that should not be crossed too quickly. The cabin held its silence around them, the wind outside fading until even the trees seemed to pause, and Ethan exhaled, slowly, running his fingers along the grain of the floor until they found the edge of that faint symbol again, sharper now that he knew where to look, not random, not decorative, it was precise, military precise, the kind of marking used when something needed to be found again by the right eyes and no one else. And a memory stirred, not fully formed, just a feeling of cold metal, of waiting underground, of signals measured in time instead of sound. He pushed himself to his feet and stepped back, scanning the room with a different awareness now, every board, every nail, every shadow carrying weight. This place had not been abandoned. It had been sealed, preserved, left behind with intention. Rex stood again, circling once before returning to the same exact spot, his tail low, his ears flicking at something Ethan still could not hear, and then the dog tapped the floor once with his paw, a soft, deliberate motion, not frantic, not afraid, a signal. Ethan swallowed, feeling that quiet certainty settle deeper into his chest, the kind that came before a decision that could not be undone. He moved toward the wall where an old rusted tool hung forgotten on a nail, a pry bar, worn but solid, and when he wrapped his hand around it, the metal felt colder than the air, as if it had been waiting too. He returned to the marked spot and hesitated, just for a second, listening again. The rhythm beneath him continued, steady, patient, and he drove the edge of the bar between the boards. The wood resisted at first, stiff with age and cold, then gave with a muted crack that echoed through the cabin like a door opening somewhere far away. Rex stepped back, but did not look away. His eyes locked on the widening gap as dust lifted into the air. Ethan worked slowly, carefully, prying one board, then another, each movement revealing darker space beneath. And with every inch the air changed, cooler, heavier, carrying that same faint metallic scent he had noticed outside, until finally the wood shifted enough for him to pull it free, exposing not dirt, not stone, but steel, smooth and dark beneath decades of silence, a surface untouched by time. And there it was, the outline of something man-made, something hidden with purpose, the edges clean, the shape unmistakable, a hatch, sealed tight and waiting. And as Ethan stared down at it, the vibration grew clearer, no longer distant, no longer faint, but right there beneath his feet, steady as a heartbeat. And for the first time since he stepped into that cabin, he understood that whatever lay below had not just been buried. It had been waiting for someone who would listen long enough to hear it. The steel surface was colder than anything Ethan had touched that day. A deep, unmoving cold that seemed to come from far below, rather than the winter air above. And as he brushed away the remaining dust, the shape of the hatch revealed itself fully, rectangular, reinforced, its edges sealed tight with precision that no ordinary cabin would ever need. And right at the center, just above where a handle should have been, there it was again, the same symbol carved into the wood above. Only this time it was etched into the metal itself, sharper, deliberate, unmistakably military. And something inside Ethan shifted, not fear, not surprise, but recognition that settled into his bones like an old memory returning without permission. Rex stepped closer, his nose lowering until it hovered just inches from the steel, his breath slow, controlled, as if even he understood that whatever lay beneath required patience, not force. The vibration continued, steady and measured, now clearer through the metal, and Ethan found himself counting again. 27 seconds, exact, again and again. A rhythm he had not heard in years, but had never truly forgotten. His mind pulled back to nights spent listening through silence, waiting for signals that most people would miss, signals that meant something was still alive beneath layers of debris and time. He exhaled slowly, steadying his hands as he traced the edge of the hatch until his fingers found a small recessed groove, nearly invisible, unless you knew what to look for, a place designed not for accident but for intention. And he paused, just for a moment, listening once more to the quiet pulse beneath him. The cabin around him remained still, the air heavy but calm, as if the entire structure was holding itself together for what came next. Rex lifted his head slightly, ears forward, eyes fixed on Ethan now instead of the floor, waiting, trusting. And that was all it took. Ethan slid his fingers into the groove and pulled. At first nothing happened. The seal held firm, resistant, as if testing his resolve. Then slowly, with a low, controlled shift, the hatch gave, not with a loud crack, but with a deep, muted release that echoed downward rather than outward, and a breath of air rose from below, cool and dry, carrying the faint scent of metal and time preserved, not decay, not abandonment, but something carefully kept, something protected. Ethan held the hatch open just enough to peer into the darkness beneath. A narrow descent revealed itself, metal steps leading down into shadow that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. And for a moment he did not move, not out of hesitation, but out of understanding. Whatever was down there had not been left behind by accident. It had been placed there, sealed, and marked for someone who would recognize the signs, someone who would listen long enough to hear what others ignored. And as Rex stepped to his side, calm and steady, Ethan knew that the moment he crossed that threshold, he would not just be uncovering a secret. He would be stepping into something that had been waiting for him long before he ever found this cabin. The darkness below did not feel empty. It felt contained, like a space that had been waiting without losing a single second. And as Ethan lowered his foot onto the first metal step, the sound was soft but certain, a hollow echo that disappeared into the depths instead of returning. Rex followed without hesitation, moving carefully beside him, his body steady, his breathing calm, as if this descent was not into the unknown, but into something already understood. The air grew cooler with each step, dry and still, carrying none of the decay one would expect from a place buried for so long. Instead, it carried a quiet clarity, the kind found in places sealed away from time. And as Ethan reached the bottom, his boots met a solid floor, smooth concrete, untouched, the faint vibration still present but no longer distant. Now it moved through the ground itself, subtle and constant, and he lifted his gaze. The darkness began to shape itself into form as his eyes adjusted, outlines of walls, straight and precise. Metal surfaces reflecting just enough of the dim light filtering down from above to reveal that this was no makeshift shelter. This was constructed, deliberate, every line measured, every corner exact, and along one wall, a row of cabinets stood closed, their surfaces clean despite the years, while across from them, a long steel table held objects arranged with quiet order, nothing scattered, nothing abandoned in haste, everything placed as if the person who left it expected it to be found exactly this way. Rex moved ahead, his steps slow, nose lifting slightly as he followed something invisible, not a scent of decay, but something older, something human, and he stopped near the far wall, where a single light fixture hung above a panel, inactive but intact. Ethan approached, his hand brushing against the surface, cold but not lifeless, and as his fingers traced the edge, the vibration beneath his feet aligned with something deeper in his memory, not just a rhythm, but a system, a signal that meant continuity, that meant something here was still functioning, still alive in its own silent way. And then he saw it, mounted beside the panel, a small plate of metal, polished just enough to reflect his face back at him, and engraved into it was a name, clear and unwavering despite the years, a name he had not spoken in a long time, a name tied to a past he thought had ended, and for a moment he did not move, did not breathe, because the realization did not come as shock, it came as certainty. This place had not just been waiting for someone, it had been waiting for him, and Rex sat beside him quietly, eyes steady, as if he had known from the very beginning that this was never just a cabin, and whatever lay deeper within this hidden space was not just a secret to uncover, but a story that had been left unfinished, waiting for the one person who would understand how to read at the name on the metal. Plate did not fade no matter how long Ethan stared at it, the letters cut deep and clean, as if time itself had respected it, and a quiet weight settled in his chest, not heavy like fear, but steady like truth, the kind that does not need to be explained to be understood. He reached out slowly, brushing his fingers across the engraved surface, the cold metal grounding him in the present even as something from the past stirred just beneath his thoughts. Rex remained beside him, silent, watchful, his gaze shifting from the plate to the room beyond, as if reminding Ethan that the story did not end with a name. It began there. The vibration beneath the floor continued, no longer just a signal, but a presence woven into the structure itself. And as Ethan turned, his eyes adjusted further to the dim light, revealing more of what had been hidden in plain sight. Along the far wall, a series of sealed containers stood stacked with careful precision, each one marked with the same symbol he had seen above, and beside them, a reinforced cabinet sat slightly apart, its surface cleaner than the rest, as if it had been the last thing touched before everything was closed. He stepped toward it, each movement slow, deliberate, the sound of his boots soft against the concrete, the air still and almost reverent, like a place that remembered every step taken within it. Rex followed, stopping just short of the cabinet, his ears tilting forward as if sensing that whatever lay inside carried weight beyond its size. Ethan placed his hand on the handle, pausing once more, not out of hesitation but respect, then pulled. The door opened smoothly, without resistance, revealing rows of files, neatly arranged, untouched by dust or decay, each labeled with dates and codes that spoke of years of work, years of waiting, and beneath them, a smaller compartment held something different, a box, plain on the outside but carefully positioned. He lifted it gently, feeling the surprising weight of it, not overwhelming, but significant, and when he opened it, the light caught on what lay inside, not scattered, not chaotic, but organized, deliberate, documents, keys, and sealed envelopes, each one carrying a value far beyond what they appeared to be at first glance. And Ethan understood without needing to count, without needing confirmation. This was not just money. This was something built, preserved, protected, something meant to be discovered only by someone who would look beyond what others dismissed. Rex exhaled softly, settling down beside him. Calm now. As if the search he had begun long before Ethan understood it had reached its first answer. And as Ethan sat there in the quiet of that hidden space, the faint vibration steady beneath him, he realized that what he had found was not just a secret buried under a broken cabin. It was a message left behind by someone who believed that one day, someone else would come along, someone who would listen, who would see value where others saw nothing. And in that moment, Ethan knew he had not arrived here by accident. He had been led, step by step, to a place that had been waiting not just to be opened, but to be understood. The box rested open in Ethan's hands, but the deeper he looked, the clearer it became that what lay inside was only the surface of something much larger. The documents were not random. They followed a pattern, each page aligned with the next, dates forming a timeline, locations marked with precision. And as he lifted one carefully, the paper felt firm, preserved, not fragile like something forgotten, but maintained like something meant to endure. Rex shifted slightly beside him, his head tilting as if listening not to the room, but to Ethan himself, sensing the change in his breathing, the quiet tension building as pieces began to connect. Ethan scanned the page, his eyes moving slowly, deliberately, recognizing terms, structures, systems that belonged to a world he had once lived in, a world where nothing was accidental and everything had purpose. And as he turned another page, the realization deepened. This was not just a hidden reserve of wealth. It was a record, a carefully constructed archive of something that had been moved, protected, and hidden in plain sight, something that required both knowledge and patience to uncover. He set the papers down gently and reached for one of the sealed envelopes, its edges crisp, untouched, and when he opened it, the contents inside were simple. A letter, handwritten, the ink dark and steady, as if it had been written with complete certainty. And for a moment he hesitated, not because he feared what it might say, but because he already felt its weight before reading a single word. Rex lowered his head onto his paws. Calm now. The earlier tension replaced by something quieter, something resolved, and Ethan unfolded the letter slowly, the sound soft in the still air, his eyes moving across the first line, and with each word, the space around him seemed to narrow, not physically, but in focus, as if everything beyond this moment had faded away. The voice within the writing was clear, measured, not rushed, not desperate, but intentional. It spoke not of loss, but of choice, not of hiding, but of waiting. And as Ethan continued reading, he understood that this place, this entire structure beneath the cabin, had been designed with a single purpose, not just to store what could not be lost, but to ensure it would be found by someone who understood what it meant, someone who would not see it as an opportunity alone, but as a responsibility. The vibration beneath him continued, steady as ever, but now it felt different, not like a signal searching to be heard, but like something acknowledging that it had been. And Ethan lowered the letter slightly, his gaze drifting across the room again, seeing it now not as a hidden bunker, but as a message, every detail placed with care, every element part of a larger intention. And in that quiet, grounded space, he realized that what had been left here was not simply wealth waiting to be claimed, it was a continuation waiting to begin. And somehow, without anyone telling him, without any clear instruction, he knew that whatever came next would not be about what he had found, but about what he chose to do with it. The letter did not end with instructions. It ended with a question, one that was never written directly, but carried in every line. And as Ethan lowered the paper back into the box, he felt that quiet weight settle deeper inside him, not as pressure, but as purpose, the kind that does not demand action but waits for it. Rex lifted his head slightly, watching him with steady eyes, as if measuring something beyond movement, something quieter. And Ethan exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting back across the room, seeing now what he had missed before, not because it was hidden, but because he had not been ready to see it. The containers along the wall were not identical, subtle markings separated them, sequences that aligned with the documents in his hands, each one part of a larger system, a structure built not just to store value, but to guide it, to direct it with intention. He stood and moved toward the nearest container, his steps calm, deliberate, the faint vibration beneath the floor no longer unsettling, but grounding, like a steady reminder that everything here still followed a rhythm. He placed his hand against the metal surface, then opened it carefully. Inside, the contents were arranged with the same precision, sealed cases, labeled, documented, nothing excessive, nothing careless. And as he examined them, the realization became clearer. This was not a hidden fortune meant to be taken and spent. It was a foundation, something meant to be used, extended, continued. Rex stepped closer, his presence steady at Ethan's side, not urging, not warning, simply there, as he had always been. And Ethan allowed himself a moment of stillness, letting the silence of the place settle around him, the air cool, the light faint, the structure holding its quiet strength. And for the first time since he had stepped into the cabin above, he did not feel like an outsider uncovering something huge. He felt like he had stepped into something that had been waiting for him to arrive, not by chance, but by design. He turned back, toward the table, toward the box, toward the letter that now seemed less like a message and more like a hand extended across time. And he understood then that what had been left here was not simply a secret to be revealed, but a path to be chosen, one that required more than curiosity, more than courage. It required the same quiet qualities that had brought him here in the first place: patience, awareness, the willingness to listen when others turned away. Rex shifted slightly, his tail resting still against the floor, his breathing even, and Ethan nodded once, not to the dog, not to the room, but to the understanding that had finally taken shape within him. Whatever this place had been before, whatever it had held for all those years, it was no longer waiting in silence. It had been found, and now, for the first time, it was ready to begin again. The stillness of the bunker no longer felt like silence. It felt like attention, as if the space itself had shifted from waiting to watching. And Ethan stood there for a moment longer, letting that awareness settle into him, not rushing, not reaching for more than what had already been given. Rex rose slowly beside him, stretching just enough to release the tension from his body, then stepped forward with quiet purpose, moving past the table toward the far end of the room where the shadows gathered more densely. His nose lifted slightly, tracing something unseen, something that did not belong to scent alone. Ethan followed, his steps measured, his mind no longer searching blindly but observing, connecting, understanding. The vibration beneath his feet continued its steady rhythm, but now it seemed to guide rather than warn, a subtle pull toward something not yet revealed. And as Rex stopped near the back wall, Ethan noticed what he had missed before: a narrow seam running vertically through the concrete, nearly invisible unless you stood at the exact angle he now found himself in. The line was too straight, too intentional to be natural, and he reached out, pressing his hand against the surface, the cold firmness beneath his palm confirming what his instincts already knew. This wall was not solid, not entirely. It concealed something more. Rex glanced back at him briefly, his eyes steady, calm, as if to say the same thing he had said at the cabin floor above. Look closer, listen. Longer. Ethan traced the seam with his fingers until he found a slight indentation, no larger than the width of a coin, and he pressed it gently. At first nothing happened. Then a soft internal shift echoed from within the wall, followed by a slow, controlled movement. The seam widened just enough to reveal a hidden panel sliding inward, not with force, but with precision, and behind it, another space emerged, smaller, more focused, illuminated by a faint light that seemed to exist without a visible source. And as Ethan stepped forward, the air changed again, not colder, not heavier, but clearer, like stepping into a place that had been sealed even more carefully than the rest. The room contained a single structure at its center, a reinforced case, elevated slightly from the floor, its surface smooth and untouched, and unlike everything else he had seen. This was not surrounded by files or containers. It stood alone, deliberate, final. Rex approached it slowly, then stopped, sitting down without hesitation, his posture straight, his presence steady, and Ethan felt it too, not as fear, not as doubt, but as significance. Whatever rested inside that case was not part of the system he had uncovered so far. It was something deeper, something that completed it. He stepped closer, his reflection faintly visible in the polished surface, and, as he reached out, his hand paused just above it, not out of uncertainty, but out of understanding that this was not just another discovery. This was the reason everything else had been left behind, and in the quiet that followed, with the steady rhythm beneath his feet and Rex beside him, Ethan realized that he was no longer uncovering a hidden past. He was standing at the edge of something that had been waiting for him to decide what it would become next. The case did not respond to touch alone. It seemed to recognize intention more than pressure, and Ethan stood there with his hand hovering just above its surface, feeling that same quiet pull he had felt since the moment Rex first stopped at the cabin floor above. Not a force, not a command, but an invitation, and slowly, without rushing, he lowered his hand and placed it flat against the smooth metal. The contact was immediate, a faint warmth spreading outward from beneath his palm, subtle but undeniable, as if the case itself had awakened to his presence. Rex remained seated, perfectly still, his gaze steady and calm, no longer searching, no longer signaling, as if whatever he had been guiding Ethan toward had now been reached, and for a moment, nothing else moved. The air held its breath, the vibration beneath the floor aligned into a deeper, slower rhythm, one that no longer felt like a signal, but like confirmation. And then the surface beneath Ethan's hand shifted, not abruptly, not mechanically, but with a controlled precision, a seam appearing where there had been none before, the top of the case separating just enough to reveal a narrow opening. And from within, a soft light emerged, not bright, not harsh, but steady, warm, like something preserved rather than powered. Ethan drew a slow breath and lifted the lid further, the movement smooth, almost effortless. And inside, what he saw was not what he expected, not stacks of currency, not gold, not anything loud or overwhelming, but something quieter, something more deliberate, a collection of sealed folders, a small metal device. And at the center, resting with careful placement, another letter, this one different from the first, its paper thicker, its edges reinforced, as if it had been meant to last longer than time itself. Ethan reached for it slowly, his fingers steady, and as he lifted it, the light within the case dimmed slightly, not fading, but settling, as if acknowledging that it had been opened for the right reason. Rex lowered his head just slightly, his ears still forward, his presence unwavering, and Ethan opened the letter, the paper unfolding with a soft, measured sound, his eyes moving across the first lines, and immediately, the tone was different, not just reflective, but direct, not speaking to anyone, but to him. And as he read, the pieces that had been scattered through the bunker began to align fully. This was never just a hidden reserve, never just a system waiting to be discovered. It was a continuation of something that had been interrupted, something that required not just access, but understanding, and the words on the page did not instruct him what to take. They asked him what he was willing to carry forward, the responsibility, the purpose, the intention behind everything that had been built here. And as Ethan stood in that quiet space, the soft light illuminating the case, the steady rhythm beneath his feet grounding him, he realized that the true value of what lay before him could not be measured in numbers alone. It was measured in what it would become in the hands of someone who chose not just to find it, but to honor it. And in that moment, without needing to say it out loud, he understood that this was the choice he had been brought here to make. The words in the letter did not rush to explain themselves. They unfolded slowly, line by line, as if they expected to be read with patience rather than urgency. And Ethan stood there in the quiet glow of the open case, letting each sentence settle before moving to the next. The message was not about what had been hidden, it was about why it had been hidden, and more importantly, why it had been left to be found. The handwriting carried a steady confidence, not pride, not regret, but clarity, as if the person who wrote it had already made peace with everything they were leaving behind. Rex remained still beside him, his presence no longer alert or tense, but grounded, as if the search had transformed into something else entirely, something calmer, something complete. And as Ethan continued reading, the structure of the entire place became clearer in his mind. The containers, the documents, the system of records, all of it was part of a design meant to preserve more than wealth. It was meant to preserve intention, to ensure that what had been built would not be lost to time or misused by chance. The letter spoke of responsibility not as a burden, but as a continuation, something passed forward rather than handed over, and Ethan felt that shift within himself, the realization that this was never about ownership. It was about stewardship. He lowered the letter slightly, his eyes moving across the room once more, seeing it now with a deeper understanding. Every detail aligned with a purpose that extended beyond the moment of discovery. The vibration beneath his feet remained steady, but it no longer felt like something separate from him. It felt connected, like a rhythm he had unknowingly followed to reach this exact point. He looked back down at the case, at the items resting within it, the device, the folders, the letter, each one representing a piece of something larger than any single person, and he reached for the small metal device next, lifting it carefully, its weight balanced, its surface smooth and unmarked except for a single interface, simple, precise. And as he turned it in his hand, a faint light appeared, not activated by force, but by presence, responding in the same quiet way everything else in this place had. And he understood without needing instruction that this was not just a tool. It was a key, not to open something physical, but to access what had been prepared, what had been secured beyond the walls of this bunker. Rex shifted slightly, his gaze following the movement of Ethan's hands, calm, trusting, and Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment settling fully into place, not overwhelming, but grounding. And for the first time since he had stepped onto that frozen ground above, he was no longer searching for answers. He was holding them, and the question that remained was not what he had found, but what he would choose to become now that he understood why it had been left for him at all. The device rested in Ethan's hand with a quiet certainty, its faint glow steady, not demanding attention but holding it. And as he stood there in the stillness of that hidden room, he felt the final pieces of something long unseen fall into place, not with noise or urgency, but with a calm clarity that left no doubt. Rex rose slowly beside him, stepping closer until his shoulder brushed lightly against Ethan's leg, a simple gesture, grounding, familiar, and Ethan glanced down at him briefly, the dog's eyes steady and calm, no longer searching, no longer signaling, as if the path they had followed together had reached its turning point, and now the next step belonged to Ethan alone. He lifted his gaze once more, looking across the room, at the containers, the files, the carefully preserved structure that had waited through years of silence. And he understood now that nothing here had been left unfinished. It had been left ready, ready for someone who would not rush to claim it, but who would take the time to understand it, to continue it with the same care it had been built with. The vibration beneath his feet remained steady, but it no longer felt like something separate from the space. It felt like part of him, like a rhythm he had aligned with without even realizing it. And slowly, he returned the letter to its place, closing the case with the same deliberate care it had been opened, the soft light within dimming once more, not disappearing, but settling back into quiet readiness. And he held the device a moment longer, feeling its weight, not heavy, but meaningful, then slipped it carefully into his jacket, not as something taken, but as something accepted. Rex turned toward the stairs without being told, pausing just once to look back, as if confirming Ethan was ready, and Ethan nodded slightly, not speaking, not needing to, and together they moved toward the steps, the metal echoing softly beneath their feet as they began to rise, the air shifting gradually with each step, the cool stillness of the bunker giving way to the faint scent of wood and winter above. And when Ethan emerged back into the cabin, the light had changed, the sun lower now, casting long golden lines through the broken windows, illuminating the dust in the air like something suspended between past and present. He stood there for a moment, taking it in, the worn floorboards, the quiet walls, the place that had once been seen as nothing more than a mistake. And he could almost hear the echoes of laughter from those who had mocked him. But they felt distant now, unimportant, because what mattered was not what they had seen, but what he had chosen to see. Rex stepped forward, settling near the doorway, his posture relaxed, at ease in a way he had not been before, and Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight of everything he had found settling into something steady within him, not overwhelming, not consuming, but guiding. And as he looked out at the quiet stretch of trees beyond the cabin, He understood that this was not the end of what he had discovered. It was the beginning of what he would build from it. Something quiet, something meaningful, something that would carry forward the same intention that had led him here in the first place. The cabin no longer felt like a place abandoned by time. It felt like a place returned to purpose. And as the golden light stretched across the worn floorboards, Ethan moved slowly through the space, not inspecting it as he had before, but seeing it now as something that could be rebuilt, not just with tools and wood, but with intention. Rex followed at a quiet distance, his movements relaxed, his presence no longer alert but settled, as if the tension that had guided him here had finally been released. And outside, the wind moved gently through the trees, carrying a softer sound now. Less like a warning and more like a reminder that the world beyond this cabin still waited, still moved forward. Ethan stepped onto the small porch, the old boards creaking beneath his weight, and he paused there, looking out over the stretch of forest, the snow catching the last light of the day, reflecting it in a way that made everything feel still and endless at the same time. He slipped his hand into his jacket, feeling the shape of the device resting securely against him, not as something hidden, but as something entrusted, and he understood now that what lay beneath the cabin was not meant to remain buried again. It was meant to be carried forward, shaped into something that could exist in the open, something that could reach beyond these trees. Rex stepped beside him, sitting at the edge of the porch, his gaze fixed outward, calm and steady, and Ethan rested his hand gently against the dog's neck. A quiet acknowledgement of the path they had taken together, the silence between them no longer heavy, but full, and as the light began to fade, Ethan turned back inside, moving with purpose now, gathering what little he had brought with him, clearing space, opening windows to let the cold air move through, not to erase what had been, but to make room for what would come next. The cabin responded in small ways, the creak of wood, the shift of air, as if it too recognized that something had changed. And as night settled in, Ethan built a small fire, the glow of it steady and warm, casting light across the walls that had once been dark and forgotten. And for the first time since he had arrived, he did not feel like he was passing through. He felt like he was staying, not because he had found something of value, but because he had found something that needed to be continued. Rex lay near the fire, his breathing slow, his body at ease, and Ethan sat back against the wall, the quiet of the cabin surrounding him. Not empty, not silent, but alive in a different way now. A way that did not demand attention but offered presence. And as he closed his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth settle into his bones, he realized that the true change had not come from what he had uncovered beneath the floor. It had come from what he had chosen to see within it. Not an ending, not a reward, but a beginning that had been waiting patiently for someone willing to carry it forward. Morning did not arrive with noise. It arrived quietly, like a promise kept without needing to be announced, and the first light slipped through the cabin windows in soft lines, touching the wood, the walls, the space that no longer felt forgotten. Ethan opened his eyes slowly, the warmth of the fire now reduced to a faint glow, and for a moment he simply listened, not for anything unusual, not for signals or signs, but for the absence of them, the deep, steady calm that had replaced the restless silence from before. Rex lifted his head as soon as Ethan stirred, his tail giving a slow, gentle movement against the floor, not eager, not alert, just present, and Ethan pushed himself up, stepping toward the window. The forest outside stretched wide and still, the snow untouched, the air clear in a way that made everything feel new again. He rested his hand against the frame, looking out, but not searching, not expecting anything more to reveal itself, because he understood now that what needed to be found had already been placed in his hands, and what mattered next was not discovery, but direction. He turned back into the room, his movements steady, purposeful, and he began with simple things, clearing space, stacking wood, opening the door to let fresh air move through, each action small but deliberate, each one grounding him further into the decision he had already made without needing to say it aloud. Rex followed him from one side of the cabin to the other, calm and steady, no longer guiding, no longer leading, just walking beside him. And there was something in that quiet companionship that felt complete, like a journey that had reached its natural end without needing to be marked. and as the hours passed, the cabin began to shift in subtle ways, not transformed, not restored all at once, but awakened, the light filling it differently, the air moving more freely, the space responding to presence instead of holding on to absence. And when Ethan finally stepped back outside, the sun higher now, casting warmth across the snow, he paused once more, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness. The land stretched out before him, open, quiet, unchanged, and yet everything within it felt different, not because the world had shifted, but because he had. He reached into his jacket briefly, feeling the device still there, steady, real, not as a symbol of what he had gained, but as a reminder of what had been entrusted to him. And he let his hand fall back to his side, his gaze steady on the horizon. Rex sat beside him once more, both of them facing forward, not looking back at what had been uncovered beneath the floor, but toward what would be built above it. And in that quiet moment, with the wind moving gently through the trees and the light settling across the land, Ethan understood something simple and lasting, that some things are never truly lost. They are only waiting for the right hands to find them. And when they are, they do not change the world all at once. They change one life, one choice, one quiet beginning at a time.